Hello, welcome to the video where we play games that aren't getting as much love as they need to. So this is going to be a slice and dice spell list, tier list. I've done a lot of kind of like all blue runs, and I just kind of like how magic works in this game, and I thought it would be helpful for people just to kind of talk about how each of these work. So I think burst is the first spell we're going to cover here because you always have it every game. So kind of looking at it versus other spells is going to be kind of important. Plus, there's a lot of spells that cost 2 mana, so it's going to have a similar cost. So comparing from there is going to be kind of important. So in the tier list, we have meme, which means like you take it as a joke, it's haha funny. Generally bad means it's going to be good in some scenarios, but it's going to be so rare. And when you're not in that one scenario, it's just not great. So don't take it. Situational means it's sometimes good in like specific spots. Maybe it's a combo piece or something. That's when you'd kind of want to take it. Generally good just means if you take it, you're gonna get some good benefit out of it. And then OP just kind of means it's always good. I can't think of a scenario when you wouldn't want to take it because of that. So first is 2 mana, deal 2 damage, or shield 2 to an ally. So I would put this in generally good. 2 mana, it can be saved throughout turns, so you don't have to use it right away. It can save someone, or it can finish an enemy off. Just very helpful, and it's fairly efficient, especially in early game because dealing 2 damage is harder to do, and it's easy to come up with 2 mana throughout 1 or 2 turns. So the very least, it's pretty good. Then comparing to it is Burst Plus. This is a tier 7 item. So because we're getting it so late, I would say it's going to be more situational, even though it is strictly better text-wise than Burst. You're getting it much, much later, at least halfway through the game, depending if you have some sort of a blessing that gets you item tiers later into the game, or if you're getting it, like I think it's round 14-ish or something, you're gonna get tier 7 items. But the strict upgrade is kind of nice. And there is a weird benefit to it, and that just odd amount of damage. So an odd plus an odd isn't even. So you can do some of the damage checks, like some enemies, for like the quartz, they have 7 HP. So if you end up doing 5 to it and ends up dying, so you have to do odd. Burst can't ever get there unless you have another odd source. That's that. Meant is just it's just generally bad. Very rarely is it going to be a heal spell. This is attached to one of our tier 1 red units. It's very rarely is this going to help. If they're at 1 or 2, this can help. Other than that, it's not that great. And the only time it ends up beating like burst here for the shielding is if they have poison, because I don't think you can shield poison. It just kind of goes through. The next one we're going to talk about is Restore. It's 2 mana. You heal 1 to all allies. This is very pip efficient. Bring it out of the wall of text there. It's very pip efficient. So if you have 5 heroes, that's 5 health, but that's provided that they all have damage. If you only have 1 hero that's taking damage, it's 2 mana heal 1. You could have just done Burst to save someone for the same mana. So it's very rare that this is going to be cast over it. So it's very rare for just situational. It's like that 1 HP is going to stop you from taking some poison damage is the only time you'd use it. Gaze is also tied to a tier 1 red unit. It's 1 mana reroll, and you get the reroll next turn. So it's not very uncommon for you to have a turn 2. You don't always beat combats in 1 turn. So you'll see this especially early on for use. The problem with Gaze is you kind of want it later on for when you might have some sort of a cantrip build, because just getting extra reroll has extra chances for cantrips, especially if you have like Sorcerer or Initiate, I suppose, is a tier 1 blue unit, but doesn't have that many cantrip sides where you might just gain that mana back. So it's kind of like an extra reroll for free. There's just a bit of an opportunity cost. Or you can technically generate mana too if you get lucky with your rerolls. You get an extra reroll from like a Jester or something, and you still have the Initiate or whatever. So you get a couple extra ticks. You'd have to get kind of lucky for that to happen. So Gaze is just generally going to be bad. I don't think I can quite put it into situational because I don't think there's enough scenarios to where you're searching for like one exact role uh, for it to happen. I could maybe see an argument for it to go into situational, but I don't think it's good enough. So bandage is 2 mana, and it's going to heal 1 and cleanse 1 with single use. So you only get to use this once a combat, and it's tied to a red unit. So I actually think this is kind of a meme almost. It's just the cleanse is the only reason why I would want to keep it. You're not going to be running into weaken unless you're maybe in like unfair. Oh, I guess you could run into like petrify in some of these hard modes right away with the thorns, so it becomes a lot better there. And easier modes, like easy, it's just not that great. The cleanse doesn't really come into play because you've probably upgraded the unit by then. Don't recommend. Taking this, swapping this unit out for a different red unit will get a lot better. And now this is all the tier 1 red units. So we're going to be going into the blue units now. Flare is just generally good. It's 4 mana, deal 5 damage. So dealing 5 is quite rare early in the game or in general. 5 damage just kills a lot of things. It kills goblins. It's also a way to get overkill damage against bandits. If they're at 3 HP and they take 5, that's 2 over. So, well, it doesn't have to be in the bandits, but if a bandit is adjacent, I should say. If a bandit is adjacent and they're at the enemy unit is at 3 HP and you cast Flare for 4 mana, you deal 5 and it runs away. The setup is significantly easier there than getting them, to like 1 HP and dealing 3 damage. So just generally good. The only issue why it's not going to be an OP tier is because it's tied to a tier 1 unit. If I was able to get this as an item, I might put that in OP because it's just always useful throughout the game. It's not too difficult to generate 4 mana. Depending on your comp, can be harder, but like you're not going to be keeping mage forever. So you're going to be losing this spell at some point, maybe very soon, because the blue upgrade is just better than the other one you're going to get for your hero upgrade round 2 or later. So that's that. So the next one is going to be Slice right here. It's 3 mana, deal 1 damage to all enemies. So this does hit ranged units, which makes it insane, in my opinion. So I think this is just generally good. My one complaint is it is tied. In this scenario, I have a different one for when it's an item. It is tied to the student, which only has 3 sides, one of which is just a copy aside. And it's also on a tier 1 unit, so not that great. But in the easier difficulties, 3 mana dealing 1 is pretty great. But if you can somehow generate 6 mana, you can cast it twice and you can kill everything with 2 HP or less. So archers, for example. In the harder difficulties, if you get 3 mana, which is not that hard, you can kill illusions early on, and they have the petrify and all these negative buffs, and it lets you hit anything else. It's also really good versus the Curse Pristine because they've all taken damage, so it's basically like that curse didn't happen. You're probably going to cast Slice anyways, and it's also an enabler for other spells. If they've taken damage, like a Scald does 2 damage to everything that's taken damage this turn, is very helpful. I like it. That, of course, with the other blue units, that's in the generated mode, because that's the only way you can get multiple blue units, but generally good. Gather, it is very situational when it's good, but it is good in some situations. So it is 2 mana. Blank sides gain 2 mana. So this includes if you've used a single use item. Exert also counts for this, if I recall. Let's say hypothetically you get unlucky, you have like an invoker or something as well on your team, or you have a knight, or you have one of the yellow units that has the exert side as well. You turn a nothing side into 2 mana. So if you have one of those, it's even, so not that great. But if there's 2 dead sides, you're netting 2 mana. It's just a good failsafe to generate mana to do stuff. This might be an extra shield cast, which could save someone, or it could just be 2 damage an extra 2 damage from burst, and that ends the combat, which could be very helpful. Could be very helpful. Now, cut is a spell I have a very difficult time evaluating. So it's on a blue unit. It's tier 1 blue unit. It's 1 mana, deal 2 damage, but to pay for that basically second extra mana that you normally get from burst, you deal 3 damage to an ally, and this only targets the top enemy. So there's a lot of restrictions to when cut can be cast, but it is mana efficient. The thing is, you can't necessarily hit it on yourself because it's on the cultist, and their mana sides deal damage to themselves. So it's kind of expensive. If you want the enemy to run away, it becomes a lot harder because you're taking more damage than you're dishing out. So I would maybe put this in situational. It does specify for the topmost enemy, so that ends up being an archer for whatever reason. It will kill them, but it's just kind of a little awkward to use sometimes, and I don't think it meets the same standard. It doesn't. It's not as good as burst, right? Which isn't generally good, and it's not as good as the other ones that we've put up there thus far. So uh, I wouldn't put it there, and it's not that great for a beginning game spell. Anyway, all right. Imbue is going to be our only spell attached to an orange character. So this is a tier 2 unit. It's 1 mana, single use, and they get +1 to their side. It's going to be very situational when this is going to be used, but it can be very helpful. So if you have a 3-pip side going up to 4, this all of a sudden starts killing zombies. It can be really great if you have cleave on a side, because then you're hitting for 2 on either side, so you're spending 1 mana to effectively deal 3 more damage, and that's very hard to beat efficiently. Like burst plus is 2 mana, deal 3, or shield 3, and so that's very good on its own. You do only get to use it once a combat, unfortunately, which makes it not great, but it can make differences, and it's really great at overcoming armor for like gnolls. So if you roll unluckily, you have a side that only deals 1 damage. Well, you do 2, and it's going to do damage. It's not going to get ignored anymore. It can also just add on extra status effects. So if you have a side with poison or weaken or any other side effect like that, or mana gain, you're spending 1 and you're getting an extra mana back, or you're doing an extra poison damage. So you're getting 1 mana, 2 damage, which is very efficient as well, on top of the additional 1 that you get from the straight. Would recommend. Now we're going to be going into balance, which is going to be back into our red units. So this is the same cost as Slice, but instead of just dealing 1 damage to every enemy, we're also healing for 1. So it is strictly better, in a vacuum at least, better than Slice. You are tied to Druid, and Druid is not that bad in my opinion. I kind of like some of the versatility they have, but we're not talking about units. And it's tier 2, so you can win games with just tier 2 units, or at least just keeping 1. That's not going to hurt you that much. And it really does enable some of the stuff. It hits the back line. It has all the same benefits as Slice. I don't think I can move it into OP tier. It's not like, cool, this solves the game for me. The healing as turn 1 really doesn't make a difference unless units have died. And it's very rare for healing 1 to make a difference. So you're going to have to get multiple casts unless you have some sort of mana generation tool that's not that much better, right? 2 casts. Well, no, you're healing for 2 and you're dealing 2. That makes more of a difference. So I'm going to put it in generally good. Not to mention, you get it slightly later than Slice as well. A good mid-game spell. Next up is Circle. I should move my cursor so you can read it. Circle gives self-heal to a target for 2 mana, and then it's got deplete, so it costs 3 more. So this is a good combo piece for sides that have a self-harm. So if it's on a mana side for self-harm, not good. You could spend 2 mana to get back 2 mana. You're even if you're doing 3. Well, now you're only netting 1, but you're using 2 dice to gain 1 mana. You might as well have just rolled 1. The only time this would happen, you'd like have to do this, is if they're like 1 HP and they can't get the benefit, and you don't want to suicide them. So not great in that scenario. Barbarian, where they have a lot of damage on one side and not a lot of HP. It could save their life and it mitigates some of the damage there. So that's pretty good. There's also like a tier 1 yellow unit that has 5 damage pain on it and it only has 4 HP. This stops it if you end up getting this soon. So that's pretty helpful because you're effectively doing 2 mana, use 2 dice, deal 5 damage. That is right up there with Flare. So I think that's just generally good, but that requires like a combo piece, right? You have to have 2 pieces. Flare requires 1 unit in mana. Um, so I would maybe put Circle in situational. Heal builds aren't like super common. Not gonna put that up in generally good. Next up is going to be Wings. This is also tied to a red unit here. It is 2 mana, heal 3 to the topmost and bottommost ally. Now, there's a lot of stuff that does target them. There's the 3 witches early on, which you have the top, middle, bottom. Hexia, which targets the bottom, and no, it just targets the bottom. Then there's like Tyrannus that just auto kills the top, so it doesn't really help there. But healing in this scenario is not bad. The issue is the topmost enemy, our topmost ally, I should say, generally has some sort of dodge ability that we can use. That isn't as reliable because we have to roll it rather than just using mana, which kind of transfer between characters effectively. And the bottom one doesn't have that much HP to begin with, so it's like a decent buffer zone. But I could also just spend 2 mana to cast Burst and stop them. So it would have to specifically heal 1 more to the topmost or bottommost or both for it to be better than Burst. And that's like the one scenario it's better. I think it's just generally bad because that's not a lot of scenarios. Vine, on the other hand, I kind of really like. It's 1 mana, 1 damage, or 1 mana, heal 1 to an ally. So you might be thinking, well, isn't that just burst at like half cost, except it's healing versus shielding? Well, yes and no, but you have to consider a couple of things. One, tough. Tough makes it so they only do 1 damage at a time. So if you run into slates, you know, 5 mana kills a slate. 4 mana for flare still only does 1 damage, but 4 mana with vine does 4 damage. The other thing to consider is hydras. Hydras, if they take 5 instances of damage, they auto die. So that means you only need 5 mana and vine to kill them. Now, it's going to be harder for you to necessarily have a tier 2 unit by the time you get into hydras, because that's kind of late in the game. You start getting tier 3 units, so it's not necessarily likely for a mid-tier red unit. But that's still like pretty good. The scenarios that we're using that in aren't niche because there are bosses that summon slates. Slates are a fairly common enemy. You run into them throughout the game. If you've done the unlock for graves, they have 3 toughness, and that's kind of a slog to get them. And they kind of action economy you out of the game because they poop out units. So you kind of have to kill them first so that you don't have to deal with the skeletons. Otherwise, you can just kill. You can also kill the skeletons to deal 1 to it. If you just have like 4 damage to a skeleton, or it screws up the action economy. Is what I'm trying to get at before I start ranting. So I think it's better than situational because at worst it's slightly worse than burst. At best, it's better. So when you compare it to like flare, it's slightly less efficient than flare. Same goes for balance and slice, but the scenarios where it's good, it's very good. So I think it's better than situational. I would put it in generally good, because the situations are fairly common where it's good, and like it's never really like totally bad. I never feel like bad about having that spell, and you can get tier 2 units fairly early. Flash, on the other hand, heals 1, shields 1 for 2 mana to all allies that are dying. So 2, will make a bit of a difference, and this can effectively be a burst on a dying ally. So if there's 2 dying allies and it saves both, it's better than burst. You're more mana efficient. And that concludes all of the scenarios where I would use flash. When specifically they are dying exactly, and you have at least 2 units that are dying exactly, or like 1 more than exactly, then it saves them. Otherwise, it's not that much better. If you have to double cast it, uh, that's 4 mana to save 2 units. That's more effective than burst. But at the same time, you have to remember that's 4 mana. And 4 mana generally solves problems. Like that's 4 damage. There's a chance you just kill a unit, which could save them if it's an AoE attack, like an ogre doing a big stomp or something. So I very rarely use it, even when I have it on that red unit. So I'm gonna put it in generally bad. I could see an argument for situational, but you would have to like really push me to put it there, in my opinion. And I'm trying not to be like biased towards, oh, in this one run it was super great. It's just you get a random game, you're in a random situation. Does this solve your problem? No. This next one we're going to talk about is Glow. This one is a bit of an interesting one. So it's 2 mana, heal 3, and shield 3, which is great. So, like, what's the catch? This is like better than Burst, strictly speaking. Even better than Burst Plus, because you get a heal and the shield. It replaces blank side. So, only if you get a dud will it end up replacing this. So, there's a bit of a catch where you have to expend a dice and the mana, and that dice has to be a blank side. You can't just roll it. Now, the upside is there's a lot of heroes that have at least 1 or 2 dead sides to it if you don't have an item to replace it. So there's usually a scenario where you'll get a blank side, especially if you're specifically looking for it. It's not too hard to get, but this does make a little bit more niche than situational. It's harder for me to judge Glow specifically because I've not used it a whole lot in any of my runs. I've just never been drawn to that red character, which is an opportunity cost of getting this spell because it's attached to a hero. So that does inflate or deflate its value because it is intrinsically tied to something versus an item. Its opportunity cost is the equip slot, which is not as contested as a hero. I could see it helping in some like niche scenarios. So it's definitely not on me. And I don't think it's generally bad because, like, if we look at these, like, mend, really bad, bandage, really bad, wings and flash, it's better than those. So it's not efficient. I don't feel like it's ever going to be like the most optimal play, but it can save your guys, and it can synergize with some things. Our next spell is Renew. This is tied to a tier 2 red unit as well, and it's 2 mana, set a hero's HP at 6. Now, 6 is notably better than Mend when it was at 3. Double the cost, double the HP. So let's say you're at 1 HP, okay? You'd spend 2 and then you would heal 5. That's pretty good. Counterpoint, though, how often are you at 1, right? That being said, it can really save people here, which makes it a lot better because most die heal you for like 1 or 2 HP. So that'd be like a 1-to-1. So if you roll 2 mana and you're at 5, you'd spend 2 to heal 1. So you're talking like a dice. You use a dice to heal someone for 1. Doesn't feel great because most heal sides are like heal 2 or better if they don't have anything attached, or it's heal 1, gain 1 mana. But if it's just strictly heal, it's like 2 or 3. This is still probably bad because it's tied to kind of like a not that great red unit, on top of which shielding generally fixes a lot of the problems too that you get from burst. It might be towards the better end of generally bad. Right now I don't have any like particular order. I don't want to like click and drag them around. There's a lot of spells to go over. So I'm gonna put it towards I'll put it towards the top end over here. Infuse is a 3 mana spell that heals 3 to all allies. That's good. 3 does make a pretty big difference, and it doesn't discriminate against anyone. There's the cost is the mana. There's no like other cost, and it's on vampire, I believe, which is like a decent-ish red unit. So, it's not bad. I don't generally do a lot of healing builds. The downside of healing is it's reactive. Turn 1, you don't really cast this unless you have items specifically that interact with overhealing, or units have died beforehand, which you really don't want to like play around. So that's not particularly great. And higher levels, you can just get unlucky, or even like an easy mode, you can just kind of get unlucky, and a guy can just get bodied. But then in that case, you're only healing the units that were down in the previous round. And if you're already struggling that much, Infuse isn't going to solve that problem. Like if 4 guys died and you just got through this skin of your teeth, you're like, we're going to get there, guys. Infuse won't necessarily make the difference. It'll help create a buffer. So I'd put this in situational. So we've covered all the tier 2 red units as is, and now we're going into the tier 2 blue units. This is Zap, which is attached to the Zappy. I really, really like Zap. It's 3 mana, kill something with exactly 4 HP. So they have to have 4 HP. They can't be at 3, they can't be at 5, they have to be 4. And the reason why I like this, 4 HP isn't uncommon for enemies. Bones have it, Imps have it, which avoids some of the on-hit damage. Killing a skeleton bursts it. It also doesn't trigger any of the effects. So if a Slimer is at 4 HP, the Slimelet does not pop out, which is pretty great. And if you do 2 damage to a ghost and then cast Zap, it dies. You don't have to deal with the incorporeal thing. It's a way of bursting it down. Now, you have to get a little bit of a setup, but I've found that dealing 2 damage isn't that difficult in that scenario. Now, there are some clear downsides to this. Some of the curses give enemies extra HP, which kind of throws off that strategy, especially with Bones and other units. But you also got to keep in mind, if you deal 1 damage to a slate and then cast Zap, it instantly dies. Slates dictate that you have to hit it 5 times individually, provided it doesn't heal or anything else. Any other shenanigans go. It's 5 HP tough. Zap means, 3 mana, 1 damage kills it, which is so good because slates kind of hurt, especially if they end up getting pristine or if they get any other benefits throughout some of your curses. So I think it's generally good. I don't think it's quite OP because of some of those harder difficulties curse scenarios. You could twist my arm maybe to say it's up there, but it's a very good spell in my opinion. And Zappy isn't a horrible unit to have either. Scald. This is very dependent. So it's 3 mana, deal 2 damage to all damaged enemies. So if you have Slice, you can spend 3, deal 1 to everything, and then Scald for 3. So that'd be 6 mana. You deal 3 damage to all things. Now, that's like a very expensive inverted infuse from the red side, but it hits everything. That includes the backline. So if you get snipers, that's 3 HP that you're stopping. Those cause, after they get hit the first time, they recede into the back line. That's kind of annoying. So I kind of like it. It feels good. It's also a good combo with balance. So if you get like Druid plus I forget what the blue unit's name is, it feels pretty great. Just because you get a lot of your mana, but that does require it in 1 turn at least. At 3 mana a turn, depending on the units you get, isn't terrible to come across. I think Scald, it's probably situational. If you don't have a good setup for it, it's not that great. But when it is good, it's certainly good. Nothing I would be like insta keep. Sometimes it feels bad. Chill is 2 mana, 2 damage, weaken. So weaken can stop summons. Because it's attached to a tier 2 unit. If you're under the alpha, it's really good. It can stop that, which can really gain you some action economy. And like, there's a number of bosses that summon stuff. Lich has summoned skeletons. What the crystal one has summoned slates. I forget its name. Demons have summoned imps, and summon imps or imps have summoned skeletons. Graves have summoned skeletons, right? So it can really help save some of the action economy. It can also prevent debuffs, so you can weaken an enemy that's going to cause weaken. So even if you can't kill them, they're not debuffing, or it can stop a poison. So it's kind of like a preemptive cleanse, and it's also doing damage. It does have single use. You only get to use it once in combat. So that ticks it down significantly. If it was not single use, probably just straight to OP tier. Uh, because it's not like you can use it once per round. It's just once in a combat. So I would put it in situational. It certainly solves some problems though. Flick here is 1 mana, 1 damage, engage. So if they're at full HP, it's 2 damage, which is pretty nice. And it's once per turn you can use it. So you can't just spam it in one turn to deal damage like Vine, unfortunately. Otherwise, it would be pretty good. It is probably just going to go into situational. Jester is a pretty meh unit, in my opinion. It can be like good with some other ones, but it's not super relevant to like a lot of like combos. That extra damage is nice, and it does make things efficient, and it can help round off a turn if you have an odd number of mana. Sometimes it just ends up being better to save it. And right, like if we're talking about a classic mode, we'd be trading Flick for Flare. You know which one you'd rather have, right? It's obviously Flare. And if you do like a custom run where you have different units, multiple different blue units, you might not be losing Flare, but who would you rather have, Slice or Flick? Okay, maybe that's an interesting choice. Gather, maybe Flick. It it's not like that much better than any of these, in my opinion. Drop. Drop is 3 mana, 4 damage to the topmost enemy. Now, 4 damage is an important benchmark because that kills zombies, which can be very nice. And 3 mana, 4 damage is good. It doesn't discriminate against what kind of enemy as well. So if it's a backline, it just instantly kills them. So that immediately makes it better in my book. It's slightly more efficient than doing double burst, but you're restricted on who you can target. So it's not strictly better. If you could just do it to any target, then it's still not strictly better because it can't shield at all, but still generally good. It is tied to Invoker, which has half of its sides being blank, but Invoker by themselves can technically cast a drop, 1 in 6 chance. Probably just situational, in my opinion. Now, Burn. Burn is a very interesting spell. 1 mana, 1 damage to everything. So that includes your own guys and the enemy. This gets rid of any pristine procs for anyone, but it's also 1 damage, so that doesn't get hindered by tough or anything. And it really sets up Scald, so you can just burn Scald, and that's 4 mana, 3 damage to everything. That's pretty efficient. It's a good little combo piece. Together, if you got a good mana generating system. You can only do that once a turn, I believe. And the Fiend's like not bad. So I would put this in situational as well, but it's not a bad spell. Like, never be mad that you're taking burn. I think it's better than at least I gave it credit to when I first saw it. Foretell is 3 mana, gain 4 mana, and you gain the next mana next turn, so it's got future attached to it. You can store up to 3 mana. So getting that extra mana isn't super important. The only time you'd want to use this is if that 3 mana doesn't change the battlefield. That 2 damage doesn't kill an enemy. You don't really need to shield or anything. This generates 1 mana. Not bad. The second scenario is where you have 4 or more mana, right? So this lets you spend 3. So let's say you have 6, right? You'd spend 3, and then those 3 mana are no longer going to disappear anyways, and get an extra one back. So you'd be at 7 next turn. Unfortunately, that means you have 6 mana, and if you can't affect the game with 6 mana, I don't know what to tell you. You should have a lot of healing with either your red unit or something else, because if you don't have a lot of healing or like other effects, that doesn't feel great. 6 mana is 3 bursts. Does 6 damage solve any of your problems? Does 6 shielding solve any of your problems? Probably. Foretell can make for some very funny turns where if you have like 12 mana and you just use it like 3, 6, 9, 12, so 4 times, you get an extra 4 mana next turn. It can be kind of funny. There's an unlock for gaining if you have like 100 mana. So if you can just grind out a match, be kind of good there. So I think it's just generally bad. If you're really stuck, maybe it helps in that one scenario. Spore is going to be our next spell here. It's 1 mana. They get +1 to their side, and then it decays. So this is pretty close to Imbue. Same effect, except it doesn't have the single use per combat. You can use this throughout. You're just going to get a bit of a decay. That does make it better than Imbue, but on the other hand, you weaken your side a little bit afterwards. So I would still put it in situational. It's going to be better than Imbue, but not as good, because the only time decay is bad is when you roll that same side twice. That's a 1 in 36 chance, to do it the next turn afterwards. Slightly higher if you, if it's 3 turns, right? You use it turn 1, then you have 2 rolls. But you might never see the impact of that decay. So I'm still going to put it in situational. It's not bad. Leech here is attached to the Wraith, which is an interesting unit in itself. But it's 1 mana, heal 5 to all allies, kill an ally. So I don't like this. I think it's a bit of a meme. Healing 5 is very impactful for the board, but the only time I would ever want this is, let's say the top unit's going to die. I kill the top unit and I heal everyone else 5. That saves people. That is like the only scenario where that's good. You could have maybe like a revive, but like the unit in itself doesn't have a revive attached to it, to my recollection. You could do a combo piece of Valkyrie to prevent them from dying, and then that would make them immune to death, or an item that makes them immune to death and then heals them. But like that just doesn't feel good. Like the cost, you're losing a turn from that point onward in order to gain some benefit. That's a nope. That's a nope. That's a nope. That's a nope. Bind, on the other hand, I'm Leech is a tier 3 red unit, by the way. Bind, on the other hand, tier 3 red unit. 3 mana. They lose 4 max HP, but they're immune to damage this turn. So this really saves builds, in my opinion. So if you have sides with a lot of pain, or an enemy inflicts pain for whatever reason, that solves that problem. You run into Hexia. Well, if you hit it with a melee attack, you get the same damage, whipped back at you. Or if you cast spells, the bottom unit takes damage equal to the mana. That solves that problem, and it's what makes Hexia so difficult to kill. This solves one of the hardest final bosses, in my opinion, because I've only experienced at least the dragon and Hexia. This solves problems at a reasonable cost. 4 max HP might seem like a lot, but that's nothing in comparison to your unit dying. And it's preventative. And you get, so let's say you're going to take 10 damage, which kills it. If they're immune to damage, they would lose 4 max HP, but they've effectively taken no damage. So that's like saving 6 HP in a sense as well. Yes, they don't have as much max, so they're easier to burst in future turns, but they still can be binded again. There's no limit to how many times you can cast this a turn or in battle. So I think it's fine. I think it is very, very good. Ritual, on the other hand, is 4 mana, cleanse 2, cleave. So you're removing a bunch of stats. On a tier 3 unit, I think this is a little too late. There's a bunch of like AoE weaken effects. If this was on a tier 2 unit, I would say yeah, because you could reasonably run this against them. Because some of these sides, if you're running a cantrip build or something, this solves this issue, right? Because we can one on all enemies, right? From the Lish's perspective, is really good, and this would help prevent this. And they're like poison 2 isn't too uncommon. Poison to weaken isn't that uncommon. And the other thing, the only other scenario is when you run into basilisks, you get a lot of your sides petrified, and this is very efficient. 4 mana is kind of expensive, but so is all of your sides getting petrified because you hit it 3 times. That's 3 petrified sides from 3 allies. And if they're next to each other, this is one spell. It solves all that problems because normally you spend 1 dice to solve 1 petrify. So I'm gonna put it in generally good. You could argue me down maybe to situational. 4's a lot. You do get it later, which kind of knocks it down. That doesn't make it OP, especially with the cost. But when you have it, it solves problems. It doesn't. It feels very much like a situational spell until you have it and you realize you can just like. It's harder for the enemy to get some of those locks on you, and that's what makes it so much better. Operate is 4 mana. Bring back the topmost ally, deplete. So it costs 1 more mana every time you do this, which is a cost in itself. But, and I can't stress this enough, it's not attached to a dice. So you don't have to RNG situate to like the one side where you have the revive, which makes it so nice. I don't think it's OP because 4 mana is a bit expensive, and compare that to Bind. Bind just feels better. And whenever I've had Surgeon, it's late enough into the game where I usually just have a good build to where it's kind of clear if I've won at this point, or if I've lost, or if it's like if I don't run into Hexia, I can do this. If I do, it's going to be a little bit more dicey. Operate doesn't necessarily solve that problem, especially with the mana damage. It's a toss up if I want it to be in generally good or situational, because the issue is if your guys are dying, generally means you kind of made a mistake. The only other scenario is like they all target one guy, at which point you just kind of got unlucky. So I'm gonna put it in situational. But towards the top. Do this 4 mana, heal 1 to all allies, and they permanently gain 1 regenerate. At the end of every turn, they heal 1. That's pretty nice, but you have to think about it this way. Okay, so Vampire was heal 3 for all of them for 1 less mana. So in that scenario, you cast it once, you would heal 1, and then you get 1 from the regenerate, and then at the turn afterwards, you get 1 more heal from that point on, and you'd be tied using 2 turns. That's not that much better than what you were getting anyways with the Vampire. The healing's immediate. Sure, regen does cancel out poison, because the damage ticks at the same time. You'll notice that if you look at Troll, they have a regenerate 2, and if you poison 2, you just don't see any poison ticks at all. I think it's generally bad. Like, for a tier 3 spell, right? This solves none of your problems. Maybe if the dragon is the poison breath, but there's just better solutions to that problem. Salve, it's tied to the witch. It's 1 mana, heal 2. So burst is shielding for 2, so it gets to react. Salve has to wait for the damage to come through before it heals, but it is more cost effective to heal in this scenario than to shield. So if the unit survives, to keep your unit healthy, you can just salve twice for 4 HP next turn. And it can be really good against self-damage stuff like the Warlock has, with the Barbarian, or any other unit. That makes it pretty good. I did have a run recently, if you look at my little guide, where that kind of popped off, for sure, which is going to make me a little biased. But still, I've never been like upset that I had Salve. So it's generally good. Just one thing to note, if you have the Overheal item, which is a tier 7 item, so it's later in the game, it ends up doing damage to the topmost enemy. That would only be 2 damage, 1 mana, 2 damage to the topmost enemy, which is like a half cost burst. It's basically a cut with no downside other than the item cost. And then any healing buff item on there just makes it skyrocket. Strand, 4 mana, heal 2, but you get the cost back if it saves an ally. There will be no further discussion as to why that's bad. Flicker is 4 mana, Heal 20, cleanse. You will have no debuffs. Now, this is attached to the Plague Doctor, which poisons all of your allies. That's why it's kind of important. Very rarely are you going to have that many effects, but should you be in the scenario where that happens, he's got you covered. 4 mana then is a bit of a cost. You'd have to have multiple debuffs stacked, like weakness, poison, petrify. So it's going to be very rare where you've been like, yeah, I wish I'd cleanse 20. Anything after like cleanse 3 feels a bit overkill. Your unit will be at full HP for full mana. That is more cost efficient than, say, Salve, which I rated as generally good. But Salve can be split up for how much mana, rather than just 4 mana, put a unit at full HP, they have no debuffs. That's effectively what the text is. I'm going to put it in generally bad. I've never been like, man, I really want to cast this spell, or I wish I had a Plague Doctor for that spell specifically. Draw is attached to the Ace, which is a blue unit, tier 3. So we just did all the tier reds, now we're into blues. It's shield 1 boost, so they get a +1 to all their sides for that turn, and they get a shield. For 3 mana, that's not that great. For a tier 3 unit, buffing, getting a +1 to a side for 3 mana is not that great. You would have to hit some sort of a threshold. Probably only be able to kill zombies, if you even run into them. You're going to be running into demons and basilisks, at which point draw does nothing for you. So it's just bad. It's like a meme. It doesn't solve any of your issues. It has to do more. If it was like boost 2, shield 2 maybe, or if it cost less mana, like, because Imbue gives you that, it just doesn't give you the shield with single use. I can't think of a scenario where I've been like, man, I really wish I had draw. Miasma is 1 damage, poison, cleave. So this gets you a little bit of backline access, and let's compare this to, let's say, Flare. Because Flare is just a generally good spell. This is 3 damage, deal 6, but you have to wait for the other 3. All right, you deal 1 damage to everything. That's 3. The end of the turn happens. That's another 3 from the poison. This is better versus, like, if they have toughness for whatever reason, because they're 2 separate instances. Versus Hydras, if you run into them, poison can count as the 5th slot. So if Sorcerer ends up rolling themselves into victory with the cantrip mana, cantrip, and then you spend it, so you get it twice, then you can just cast it on your own. And it's just, every turn, so a little extra damage. Some of these later fights do take a little bit longer, which makes it better. So I would put it in generally good, but maybe towards the bottom. You can get it as early as like the Baron, at which point it's a mana generator, but the Baron isn't the toughest boss at all. Crush is a pretty efficient spell at 3 mana, deal 3 damage to the topmost and bottommost enemy. That's 3 mana, 6 damage. So first would be 2, 4, 6. Just half the cost. You're getting the same effect, but you're restricted as to who you're hitting. It can be pretty helpful. You avoid a lot of on hits. You are splitting your damage up. If it was 3 mana, deal 6 damage to one target, that might feel a little bit better. But still, a pretty reasonable spell. It helps close out some enemies. It can help hit backlines because it's not restrictive there. So I've won enough fights with Crush, and it's been helpful enough to solve some of those issues that I'd be willing to take it. And the unit it's on, I don't think it's too bad. It's not the best tier 3 blue unit, but it's still, decent. Inspire is attached to the wizard. A unit gets to reuse their dice again. So this is pretty good with some units. So if you run into like Fencer, like you inspire the Fencer, they have like the double daggers, so you get to use it 4 times, or the Wanderer with their late arrow, or their quad use. If you get any sort of setup there, I've had whereas quad use does 4 damage per tick. So that's 16 damage. You spend 4 mana, you do another 16 damage. That's 32 for 4 mana and 2 dice. That's pretty good. Well, plus the mana and all the dice it took to generate that mana. But that's beside the point. Yeah, it can be. It's very like combo roll on it. You have to be like, man, I want to use this dice again specifically. So I'd probably put it in situational. I don't think he's that great of a unit to begin with. I think there's better units. Not the worst one. They're not gassed. Blaze, on the other hand, is 6 mana, deal 13 damage. Very efficient at what it's doing. And you might say, 6 mana, that's kind of expensive. Warlock generates mana like there's no tomorrow. One of its side has Bloodlust, so if there's a lot of enemies and you just tick them, 6 mana is not that hard. It's already starting at 2 pips. Additionally, it has like one side that gives it 4 mana pain. So any other instance of mana gain at this point in the game, you're probably just going to get Blaze to pop off. And 13 damage, it's like 6 mana, kill a thing, unless it is a boss. You know, if you get this early enough versus the Baron, you can just chain Blaze because every other hit is a mana. So 2 damage is 1 mana. So if we multiply this by 6, that's 12. So we're underneath the threshold, so you just keep chaining it. And then 13 damage kills the ghosts. And because you're doing slightly more, you'll be generating mana, which means you might just double kill the ghosts. Blaze, I don't think it's hard enough to cast, and it's just efficient enough at what it does. And it just solves so many things. And, you know, it doesn't kill a Hydra in one hit, but you don't have to do the hit it 5 times strategy. So, and, you know, 7 damage. You have to come across 7 damage with whatever's left. I think it is a very good top end. Blades is 4 mana, deal 2 damage to everything. So it is a better version of Scald, except it costs 1 more mana. Artificer has no problem getting this mana. It's got some single-use sides that gain 4 mana on it, so that's not too bad. The unit itself can generate the mana, or it can be used in other manners. And 2 damage to everything, at this point in the game, doesn't necessarily help all that much. It can help set up some stuff. And if you're able to, like, double cast for anything with 4 HP or less, dying, any summoned minions at this point just die. And it avoids a lot of on-hit effects. I want to put it in generally good, but I think realistically it's situational. I know that this is getting kind of full here, but my standards are kind of high. So our next one's going to be slow. It's 4 mana, 1 damage, weaken, cleave. A lot of enemies have a lot of high pips at this point in the game with a tier 3 unit. So that doesn't really solve a whole lot of your issues. You got to keep in mind, chill had a better weekend, and with single use, I think it is better just because the opportunity cost of taking a tier 3 unit with that spell isn't that great. So I've never been like, man, slow solves my problem. You'd have to be like, unit is dying and this stops it from dying and you get some damage. But at that point, burst might also just solve that. So it would have to stop multiple units, and you would only be able to cast slow, and you wouldn't be able to burst everyone down, and slow would have to save all of them. Harvest. Kill a unit with exactly 1 HP. Gain 3 mana. It costs 1 mana. And it's ungassed, which is the worst tier 3 blue unit, or maybe even tier 3 unit, period. How often are you in the late game where there's a unit with exactly 1 HP? There's never a free setup. You can't reliably run into illusions at that point. I don't think I've ever really seen one that late into the game. And, like, you have to set it up so that they have 1 HP. So let's say you get a demon to 1 HP. You hit it with harvest and you have 3 mana. Cool, that killed something and generated mana. That's really good. That's really good. But, like, there's so many hoops you have to go through for 3 mana. It doesn't feel that good. This is all the tier 3 blue units. And now we get into some of the items. Betray is a spell that kills one of your own units. Very funny meme. It costs, let's look at my notes, 2 mana to kill an ally. Mana, also really funny. 1 mana, gain a mana. I believe it's even single use. And then hinder being, these are all tier 0 items. Betray, mana, and hinder. Deal 1 damage to an ally weakness. Very memey items. I just wanted to include them. I wanted to be an all-inclusive spell list. So tier 1, Poltis, I don't know. There's no agave there, so it heals 2. It's single use. You only get to use it once. So I kind of want to talk with the less memey versions of spells about the opportunity cost of items. So this is an early item, so you're not gonna have an item slot full. Like this is not gonna take up an item slot, and you can put a spell on any unit. They don't have to be able to cast spells or produce mana. So you're not like losing anything because the item cost slot isn't realistically a cost because it can go on any unit. If that unit dies, you're not able to cast it anymore, but it's single use. So if you needed to have casted it at this point, you would have. So that's not really a downside in this scenario. And it's 1 mana heal 2, so it's like an early self that you can get right away. It's a weaker version, obviously, because you can only use it once. But damage is also generally lower here, so it's more likely to save. Though the burst is 2 mana, so if you're unable to get the mana for whatever reason, and you only have 1, and you have missing HP, this can save a character, or it can stop a poison kill, because running into snakes at this point, or bandits can also do poison, is unrealistic. So I would maybe actually just put this in situational. And the other thing you have to keep in mind is when you have a choice, right, for heroes, there's a much more of like opportunity cost because you're losing stuff on some dice and you're getting some improvements or whatnot. But with items, these lower tier items, some of them aren't that great. Like those tier 0 items, they're good memes. They're good memes. I like the fidget spinner one. It's a good joke. But some of these like level 1 ones, it's like doesn't really affect the game all that much. Some are better than others. I could do an item list, tier list later. You're not really like losing anything. You're not, because you'd have to pick this item over something else, or if you randomly get it, you randomly get it. But at that point, you don't like what you're getting, so you're just getting a spell anyways, which isn't that bad. So I don't think the cost of taking this is that bad. That's all of our tier 1 items. Restore is going to be tier 1 spell items. This is going to be our tier 2 spell items. So restore, heal 1 to all allies. Healing 1 doesn't feel that great, as I mentioned before with Flash, which had the added bonus of shielding, but it had the restriction that it only targeted dying allies. I think they're fairly comparable. This doesn't have the shielding, the same cost, but it doesn't specify which target. 1 HP isn't too big of a deal. It's at best 2 mana, heal 5, spread amongst everything. You usually need to like help one target out. Slice as an item. Its biggest downfall is that it's tied to a tier 1 unit, and that unit isn't that great. Student isn't that great. However, as an item, I think it is significantly better because, as I mentioned, the opportunity cost of equipping this spell isn't that major. It's only a tier 2 item. So, let me double check my notes. Yeah, it's only a tier 2 item here. And because it's attached to an item rather than a hero, you don't lose it. You don't lose it when you upgrade your hero at all. You can always re-equip it or anything. So that makes it strictly better. So at this point, I'm never like disappointed in taking Slice because it's Slice and Dice. It's got to be at least generally good as an item. Debatably OP. The problem is it doesn't scale that well into the late game. It just solves a lot of the early and mid game problems if you're versus illusions. It's just 3 mana, kill so many things. It's so efficient. So we have to make our decision if it's OP or good based on the difficulty. If in higher difficulties, it's just better because you're more likely to run into these illusions. You can run into them at the beginning, I believe, or as soon as like fight 1 or fight 2. So just killing everything with those feels pretty great. Now there's not that many 1 HP enemies, and at this point you also have to consider curses. But one of those curses is also pristine, which is one I tend to take often because Slice and other effects like this solve so many of those fairly easily. So as an item, I think it solves the early and mid game, or significantly helps. It can be very efficient, and if you're able to produce 6 mana at that point, you can kill all of the backline, which can sometimes make it so that you kill all the archers and the goblin fleas, right? Because there's that combat where it's like Goblin, Archer, Goblin, well, if you just like kill or yeah, because then you have to like kill both goblins in order to get the archer. Well, now you can only have to kill one goblin, deal 3 damage to one goblin, and then you know make 6 mana because that'll kill the archer. And archer's hurt. I'm gonna put slice over here into the OP tier. Remedy here is gonna be our last 2-cost spell. So looking at my notes over here, it's heal 1, cleanse, single cast. You only get to do it once. Now cleanse is kind of important early. It's only 1 mana. Orienting into poison or petrifying these later ones kind of annoying, but it's kind of hard to get cleanse, especially early on. There's like a couple of gray units that have it. None of the blue, red, or orange units have it. There's like a couple items that do it, like first aid kit, which the orange unit has to equip. That it's not that amazing. So just because at least cleanse 1 can solve a decent number of things, I think it's generally good to take. And because it's such a low tier item, this isn't like a tier 10 item, or we're getting it super, super late. It just helps against like a fairly common scenarios. It's not too hard to have 1 floating mana, and for that 1 mana to like preserve stuff. Sprout, I'm gonna put it down here because it's easier to see. Is 3 mana, heal 3, channel. So every time you cast it in a fight, it costs less. So the first time you cast it is 3 mana, the second time you cast it is 2 mana, the third time you cast it is 1 mana, and it stays at 1. So 1 mana, heal 3 is a better version of Self. However, you have to cast it twice before that happens, and 3 is harder to get to than 1, obviously. But it does heal for a little bit more. Sprout has certainly helped, heal a lot of stuff. Any healing build isn't that bad, and it's just generally better than a lot of the red spells that you have. It is obviously reactive in that it's healing, but I enjoy it. It certainly helps. I would put it in generally good. I'm not sure if it quite makes OP tier, but because it's so efficient in its channel, if the fights go long at all, you'll get your money's worth or your mana's worth out of it. Hack here is a tier 4 item. You spend 2 mana, and blank sides get converted to deal 4 damage. Now, 4 damage, we're starting to approach the mid game here, I would believe, is pretty good. Should we run into zombies? 4 damage solves that. You'd have to run into a blank side, but some of these early units do have two dead sides. So if you're looking for something and you fail to find, and then you have 2 mana, you can convert that to 4 damage. 2 mana, 4 damage, that's pretty close to flare because it's 4 to 5 damage. So you don't get to like double cast. You're limited by dice resources, of course. So it's a bit, there's a bit of a setup required, but it's a good fail safe. And because it just like solves like when you just get unlucky, I think I might put it into generally good because it ends up solving a problem that isn't uncommon. That's never something you want. You obviously want to engineer your dice to do that. But let's say you get a statue. Well, now you're always going to have an outlet to cast that with, because you can't. Filling up a statue isn't. It's not impossible, but you kind of have to get a little bit lucky with the items. That helps. This is one of the items that can help with that. So, Hex is 3 mana. Kill a target with exactly 3 HP. So it's just like Zap, but it's 6 and it's single use. You only get to use it once versus Zap. You can use as many times as you want in a turn or in combat. So ghosts have exactly 6 HP. You just have to gain 3 mana, and the setup's there. They're dead. So that's why I like Hex. It only ends up resolving one of them. As for other enemies with exactly 6 HP, there's not that many. There's like the little spirit guides. I think they're called like surges or something. Otherwise, it's not that common. It can help like close out fights. So I'm gonna put this maybe in situational. It certainly does help stuff out. I could see an argument for maybe generally good here. Now we're moving into tier 5 items, and funnily enough, this costs 5 mana and it deals 7 damage and it's single use. So 5 mana is a little bit harder to get to. It's probably going to take you 2 turns to do there. You'll have to like end with 3 and then cast at 2, unless you have items that let you store more mana. 7 damage is a pretty good burst amount. You can kill zombies. Obviously, it's just another like fail safe there, and you can burst out bosses Right. If we look at beam here, it's tier 5. We're gonna get it before burst plus, and it's better than these in any pragmatic sense. Yeah, Clink is 2 mana, and you get 2 times to all of the ally shields, and it's got deplete, so it costs 1 more each time you cast it. Now this can be really, really good. So let's paint the following picture. You have a scrapper on your team, and you give it a bunch of shields, or if you have the item that lets you keep shields, they don't decay at the end of the turn. You get to double that, and they get to stay, right? Scrapper has steel, and doubling that means you're doing double the damage, and you're getting a lot of that shield buff. Now, sometimes this is just overkill, but doubling for 2 mana is very efficient. So you do need a little bit of a setup for this, but when it's good, it can be very good. I wouldn't be like chomping at the bit to get this, but it can be very helpful. So you can put it in situational, or I could say in generally bad, because I can't think of more scenarios where I'm like, wish I had Clink, because you have to have shields on that one person, and the double has to make the difference. That's the only time you cast Clink. Not that great in my opinion, but like I said, with like Scrapper or other units that care about steel, or if you get the Anvil, that gives your side steel. That's kind of important. But there's a lot of items, so you don't want to be like, oh man, do I get the item combo? That's very unreliable. He also cares about shields. Any ally that has a shield heals 3 and gets 3 cleanse. So this is going to solve any of your debuff problems. 3, very good at this point. If you have any more debuffs than that, you're kind of probably getting hit pretty hard, because it's probably been a couple of turns of like poison plus petrify, and you got weakened last turn or whatever. I've never been like, man, heat really goes hard in the paint here. It's kind of situational as to when you'd want it. It's generally bad from whenever I've needed to use it. So that's where I'm going to leave it. Maybe you argue it's situational. It's an item, so I haven't been able to play with it as much. Whenever I've taken it, I've never really needed it, is the other thing. And with these, like, this is a tier 5 item. So one of the things you have to consider, tier 5 items, they matter a lot more than some of these lower ones, because there's like actual effects that you're actually competing for. Mark here is our only tier 6 item. It costs 4 mana and makes them vulnerable on top of that. So they take a bunch of extra damage, 4 extra damage per hit. That really adds up fast. If you can get a lot of repeated hits off of that, that's a lot of value. So if you have a good setup, that'd be great. But if we think about how reliable it is to get all of those setups, you get to generate 4 mana, and then let's say it takes 2 characters to do that. Then you use the other 3 to hit them. That's 12 damage. How easy is that to set up? I don't think that's too bad. The only other thing you have to consider, it's basically mid game when you get this, but that does like really help. I'm not sure if this if the vulnerability does the damage reflection or not. I don't think it does. I think it's just pip based. So yeah, I think Mark is going to be pretty good there. Spark here, it gives mana gain. It is a whole 5 mana for Spark. So if a side has 5 pips on it and you hit with it, you gain 5 mana. If you had the heal 1 to all allies, you'd only gain. You have to have a side with at least 5 on it for you to break even, at which point, why did you cast Spark, right? Because I don't think there's any side that's as you gain mana or something. So you'd have to find a side where you've already been dealing 6. So one scenario I can imagine is there's deal 10 damage death on the barbarian. If you have a way to prevent the damage, or you just don't care, you just want them to Leroy Jenkins their way into victory, you would gain 10 mana there, but it'll only be a net of 5. That's not that great, especially for how late in the game you're getting it. That's a tier 7 item, so I think it's a bit of a meme. I wouldn't take that unless I kind of needed to. We're down to 3 spells. We're kind of coming in close. Charge. 2 mana shield to boost. So charge you'd be like, well, burst does that. Burst doesn't add single use, and it can do damage. Well, boost is improving a side by 2. So if you have a side with cleave, that's an extra 2, 4, 6 damage. If it's hitting everything, that's 2 damage per enemy you're hitting. If you need, well, I mean, just like anything that kind of needs that, right? Like if you have a big shield, it bursts 2 damage. So charge is doing both sides of burst effectively, but it only gets to do it once. So I would say it's like situational as to when that would help, because for the most optimal use, you'd have to save a character, you'd have to save the target it's doing, and that 2 damage has to make some difference somehow. But it can be very helpful. It can be very helpful. Yeah. It's better the one time you get to use it for when you save an ally, because then you get both effects. You get both effects. At its best, it does both effects and saves multiple people. Okay, because of the effect. And the last one, invest 4 mana, gain 6. The 6 mana is the next turn, so it doesn't like go off of itself and chain immediately. If you have 4 mana, there's got to be some way for you to use 4 mana to change the battlefield, and this is harder to do than 3 mana gain 4. Like arguably, you can't keep 4 mana, but like you could also just deal 2 damage, or you could just shield 2 so your characters are healthier. Infinity is a tier 10 item. Okay, this means you're getting it at the end, and it's 10 mana, kill a target. This has helped me kill Hexia. My bottom guy dies, whatever. The big boss that causes all of my problems is dead, so I'm losing a boss's turn for a unit's turn, and then there's like the few units that come with her, like the archer and the bird. Then it's really good, but you have to get to 10 mana. That's kind of hard to do. That's a big cost, and you kind of have to do most of that in one turn, being that following turn after, unless you're doing like an all blue run, or I guess an all red run. You could do that. Very difficult to get off. So I'm gonna say like generally bad, or maybe even meme, because getting to 10 mana it's such an arduous task. It really helps in that scenario, but getting there is so difficult. So yeah, I'll settle on generally bad. Now, before I get into this, I realized I missed 2 spells, so this might look a little bit different than normal. 2 of them that we're missing are Bolt and Grace. Now, these are both spells you end up getting as a blessing. So if you're doing a burst run or a cursed run and you made it all the way through, you can do that. Or if you're in easy mode, you can also head and get some of these. So the opportunity cost here is taking this over a different Grace. Some Graces are better than others. Now, in this case, let's talk about Bolt. It's a 3 mana, 5 damage, so this is just a better flare. Now, it's not tied to a character, which means you'll have it throughout the game always. It's not tied to boss fight only, like some of the other Graces are. It's just always going to be there, and you only have to produce 3 mana to deal 5 damage, which makes it a better version than Flare, provided the opportunity cost is not as strong. So I would put it as generally good here. I don't think it's OP. It does help in, from the early game to the late game. Flare, the effect of 3 mana, 5 damage is just good. However, I think some of the other effects that you might get in the blessings are a little bit better. Like the extra rerolls can help you find some of your combos better. It makes your party more consistent, which is something you can't really like underestimate at all. It just makes things really great. And on top of that, some of the just straight up bonuses to make your characters healthier makes it harder for them to be one shot, makes some of these longer fights way easier, especially if you're in like a cursed run. Like you might be starting with some extra damage, and the enemies at this point probably also going to be getting some extra HP to help even stuff out. So I would only put it in generally good. Yeah, I'm never like disappointed if I have to take this. The last one is Grace. This is a single use spell that basically just saves a character. It is 1 mana, which means there's not a very high cost to using it, on top of which it heals 5 and shields 5. So let's say, you have a spiker or a slate just shoving their giant fist right at one of your characters. They don't have a dodge or whatever. It's a get out of jail free card. It really saves some of your party encounters. 5 life does make a big difference. And even if your party member isn't damaged, you still have a shield to help recuperate any loss. And this can save an action economy. So let's say a character's going to die. You rolled 1 mana on your blue character or whatever. You're unlucky, you weren't able to burst them down or kill them. So you're missing out on that damage. You do grace, which means you've spent a dice to save a character, which means you get to do that. So you're net even on dice if only 1 round of combat happens afterwards. If 2 rounds of combat happened afterwards, you have effectively spent 1 dice to create or maintain the current number of dice. So your action economy stays the same, which is really important in this game in general. So now we'll kind of go into the conclusion. It might be a little bit messy or look a little bit different here because of how I've had to edit this out. But I will see you at the end of the video shortly. Those are all the spells that I am aware of. I have all the characters unlocked. I don't have all of the items unlocked, unfortunately. If we kind of go over to Slice and Dice's items, I don't have any of these like high tier ones unlocked, but this is most of them. I didn't want to save all of these items here, so this is why I kind of wrote them all out. But hopefully, this was a helpful guide for you. If you disagree with me or you have some reasoning that I maybe missed with some of these spells, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these spells for future runs. If not, have a nice day.